So I said, we're going to talk about change. You tell me why you are change experts.
Maybe I think change expert always sounds like an advisor. I would say maybe we can speak about why we benefited from change. And I can very much remember how we first met. And back then he was the founder and I was coming from a very traditional banking career with more than 20 years in banking. And today he is a banker and I'm the founder. And I think that's a good illustration and we can happy to speak about like the learnings from that and how what we took from that.
Yeah, let me jump in here. So I tried to demonstrate that I'm the banker here on this panel. At least this was our ideas in crossing borders. But looking in the audience, I see actually a lot of suits today. So you are the enfant terrible and not me, right? But yeah, I think we met 2015 the first time. You went away from your probably very well-paid corporate job in a very successful German savings bank, and I was in my new adventure it was a B2B software as a service company, and I was actually super happy to meet you because you had a address book full of very valuable contacts to savings bank, cooperative banks, and we went through the entire republic and trying to convince customers like banks to buy our product and services. And to be perfectly honest, I was actually shocked. And I mean, I was in the startup scene before. I founded a couple of companies. I was even in fintech, payment service providing in the Netherlands, but I was shocked by this over-regulated, highly regulated environment I was in. And yeah, this was like the first time where we crossed our path.
But you weren't too shocked to be a banker yourself now?
At this time I was, but I learned it the hard way, especially like from people like Chris. So I didn't went away, but I tried to really not only understand it, but to embrace it. And this is actually something when we're talking about change experts, right? It is so important that both parties or all stakeholders in such a ecosystem, like banks, fintechs, really understand each other and trying to rely on each other, right? And for example, I mean, when you build software for banks, right, and you want to sell it to them, it's not like you build an app like Candy Crush Saga or something. It's really something serious. You need to act professional. You need to embrace data protection, regulation. You need to know about PSD2, MiFID, and all those beautiful regulations that the German government and the BaFin offer. But this is so important to not only know it, but really embrace it in order to understand what is necessary in order to build the best product for the end customer, and not only like have something nice to offer.
Yeah, we're talking about crossing borders and the benefits for the ecosystem. You mentioned some. What are the benefits?
Indeed, I think Bitkom is actually a good example. So when we started with the fintech group at Bitkom, Bitkom was very much focused on representing the traditional tech industry and had not so much of an exposure on the fintech side. But for us, it was very clear, myself when I joined Finleap, where we met, and also then Sascha and others, that in order to be in this field, we need to have representation around regulation as well. And so what we did is that we said, okay, with this tech industry representation association, we can maybe build something up there. And from day one, we made sure that everyone has one vote, whether it's a new company, whether it's an established player, or whether it's like also an insurance company. And today, I would say we have probably here the broadest network across industry, so across the complete industry, representing really technology. And I would go so far that when people ask me why Berlin is a successful place to build a fintech, I would say one of the biggest advantages is that here we have a very open communication across borders, whereas in many other cities you have more like these are all the bankers and there's pretty much no startup. And here in Berlin you have a pretty strong ecosystem because you have like by far the most startups. You also have all the large associations. You have a few very successful banks. I mean, DKB is definitely one of them. And this mix is actually what, from my perspective, helps Berlin very much being successful in fintech.
Well, you're claiming in order to be able to cross borders, it takes a certain mindset from both sides. What would that be?
Yeah, actually, one of the most important ones from my perspective is openness. So there is a saying by, or not a saying, but a quote by Richard Florida, and please don't go word for it, but the free interpretation would be, it's not that gaze and an open mindset directly bring you high tech, but if you don't have an open community with a lot of very open living people, you will never have high tech. And behind this is a study that looks at basically the most successful innovation places globally. And you have places like Silicon Valley, San Francisco, you have Tel Aviv, you have Berlin. And there's a fair argument that within their respective peers, they are by far the most open places in the respective areas. And I strongly believe in that as well. So being open, having a very open mind, and actually finding out that you cross the border without really seeing that as a border, but more as a new experience and something you want to learn about.
Yeah. Being open-minded is probably something we should all be at any point, no matter what sector we work in. Is there anything you can add to that?
I mean, I fully agree with what Chris just said, because this is like the cultural and like the mind shift. Like both parties need to adapt, right? I mean, if you back in the days, it was very difficult to really combine fintechs and banks to each other because they have a totally different view on things, right? But this changed dramatically. But this is something that we all need to work on, right? Especially for the bankers, they need to be more tech savvy, right? They need to understand software as a service, infrastructure as a service, what cloud really brings to the table compared to on-premise solutions. But even in management, in entrepreneurship, how you lead people, right, with very strict delegation versus servant leadership models with like transparent OKRs, for example, right? And on the other side, it says what I said in the beginning. Even the startup employees, the founders, entrepreneurs really need to understand that in order to build a successful product that customers really like and use heavily, you need to open up for what this industry has, right? So there's no regulatory sandbox. This is a level playing field that is totally equal for banks and for fintechs from the very first moment, right? So it is very important that you embrace it in a way that you understand it and can live up to these expectations, because only then you can build trustful relationships in this ecosystem.
Yeah. We're living in a time that is changing, that does have challenges. We do have inflation, increasing interest rates, supply shortages. What does that change?
I think a lot, right? Maybe one step back to explain this level playing field, because if you look what very successful companies such as Amazon, Spotify, Netflix, Zalando really have, they are like customer focused, customer obsessed. It's in their core principles and their core values, right? But if you look at more legacy players, banks, and a lot of fintechs that I know, actually, it's more the internal processes. It's like the burn, it's the valuation, and all those topics. And this changed a lot, dramatically, to be honest. So everything that we see in the last weeks and months about inflation, interest rates, about political instability, wars, right, is that it's not only high growth is not the key driver anymore. So things like startups and fintechs sometimes laugh about banks and legacy players, like the good old Risikovorsorge, right, which is like risk provision in English, I guess, right? This is the opportunity that risk and market growth departments have the same say, have the same balance act in order to provide nice services and products for their customers. And this is something that got lost in this industry, especially in fintechs in the last years. So there was like really hyper growth in terms of customer acquisition costs, in terms of burn, in terms of valuation. And I think this is changing now dramatically to a point where all these companies need to adapt, they need to react, and that's quickly, in a way that they understand monetization. They need to understand being profitable, because even for us, when we say we want to have an ecosystem where every player stands for their individual part of the value chain, right, to make to bring up the best capabilities, the best strength, in order to have the best end-to-end solution for the customer. But this only works if they understand this piece, if they are able to run a profitable, fair, and healthy business. Otherwise, the competition is a lot in these days, right?
Anything to add?
Yeah, I would say it's also a very important proof point for the whole idea of the ecosystem. So we speak about ecosystems for quite a while. So back when I started, as I'm the traditional banker, it was still very typical that every bank and every financial player did everything themselves. Over the last years, we saw a lot of change in this area. So we sometimes call it embedded finance. We call it an ecosystem where players focus on their USPs. But in the end, it's all about everyone focus on a specific part of the value chain and then work together. And this flexibility should be dominant in a situation like this, where we have a lot of stress, because you have really experts working together very efficiently. and should be able to adapt much better to changing environments. And this is now, from my perspective, an important proof point. So on the one hand, I would expect that we will see that some players basically leave the scene because they are not able to prove themselves for reasons like you might mention. So it might be that the burn is too high, it might be that they are not profitable enough, or that they are not able to turn to profitability. But it might also be that some existing players or established players are too slow to adapt because they neglected the necessary investments in infrastructure, they neglected the good times, or didn't use the good times to really invest in their core, and now find out that they are going to be so slow when we see fastly changing environments. And I would expect that this is going to happen. And there's a saying that, as I'm coming from the investment side, in good markets, it's always hard to outperform in the market, but it's also always a time where everybody in the end somehow wins. So the only question is whether you make like 5% or 10% or even more performance. But in risky, high volatility markets, that's where you can prove whether you do have a successful strategy or not. And I think we are now going to see exactly these volatile markets, which is going to be challenging for all of us.
When we talk about crossing borders, would you, from your experience, recommend for everyone who is in digital finance in his career to change sides at one point?
I definitely think that it's very important to be open to that. Whether in your own career path, in the end, you end up working for a long time for one company or changing often. I think that's something which also depends then on very individual situations. But I think it's very important to really start ignoring borders, even though we call it crossing borders, but instead being open to change, embrace it as a positive opportunity, and always imagine yourself in the shoes of the other side. To think about, okay, what would I do? And then hopefully we will continue growing a very successful ecosystem here in Berlin and also in Germany. But as I said, I think that's now going to be a time where this can be proven or not.
Yeah, I like those terms when you say embrace it and be open and always be in a good mood. But I would like to know, when it comes to a difficult situation, a conflict, something, and that does happen, of course, in a daily work. What does that mean? Then what do you have to overcome, and where do you have to go from where?
I would say the conflict situation, at least from my perspective, it very much depends on where the conflict is coming from. And so, for example, what we do indeed see that there might be cultural backgrounds which are very different leading to conflict. So, for example, two sides not understanding each other. And then it's a lot about clarifying the situation.
You mean culture from different countries? Or
no, culture also like different backgrounds, like one looking very much at the regulatory requirements, the other one, just to put black and white example, the other one very much looking at the client benefits. So just yesterday, someone explained me a business model where my ad hoc reaction, even though I'm now in the startup scene for quite a while, was, okay, I don't believe that this is legal. And sometimes I still see myself thinking this way about business models. I say, okay, I always check it against my regulatory background, even though I'm now in the fintech scene for quite a while. So this is something where I have to reflect myself to say, okay, is that really a challenge, or is it more something that I'm too much based and anchored in traditional models? But on the other hand, I personally think the bigger challenge to cope with is not so much these kind of problems, but one of the biggest challenges from my perspective at the moment is, and that's something all companies are hit by, that we have an overall macroeconomic situation that on the one hand, we see a lot of challenges coming at us as companies. On the other hand, we are coming from a time where we're full of opportunities for all of our employees. Everyone is used to a constant increasing number of choices. And now we all have to go through very challenging times together. And that's going to be, from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges for all of us.
What are your challenges?
I think especially those challenges in those ecosystems, right? So what we are really standing for is that we want to have an end-to-end value chain where like many different stakeholders hold pieces of that value chain, right? And they are like really experts, and they can put their core capabilities and their strength really in this part. But especially in these seasons of really high volatility, of uncertainty, it is important that these relationships are really stable, that they're healthy, that they're fair, that they're transparent, but that you really work on these relationships, right? And you said about, you talked about the cultural and the mind shift topics and openness for each other. And I truly believe this is perfect when you do the crossing the board, right? Or like maybe putting it in a way that bulldozing the wall down, right? Because those borders and even those narratives, they are not crystal clear anymore, right? I mean, small fintechs like N26 is now a serious bank. It's not a small fintech anymore, right? And even they have like legacy at the moment, right? And topics that are like not very typical for a small organization. For us as a 30-year-old online bank, we are trying to make the shift exactly in the other direction, right? So we are calling ourselves a tech bank for a couple of years now, actually a SaaS tech bank in a way of a sustainable tech bank. We would like to be a technology company with a banking license, right? But that's it, right? So we are looking for other topics in the value chain to offer the great customer experience. And this is in a way where we really need to change our mind, our culture, our people as well, because we try to not hire bankers only anymore, but looking for other people, other characters, right? Especially for employer branding, this is super important because we want to be more tech savvy. So that's why for 3 years ago, we actually founded our Code Factory, which is our internal startup where we have our software development, designs, etc., everything inside of our organization, which doesn't lead to the fact that we still are open for other external players, be it fintech, be it other IT suppliers, because we truly believe that the customer decides what they want, and they are always contextually driven. They want everything fast. They want it dynamic. They want it always the best interfaces, right? And they want it fair, sustainable, safe, and secure. And if we can manage to offer this together with partners in an ecosystem, I think we are in the leading front.
So when you talk about embracing and being open, that means being patient at points, being willing to learn new things and overthrow old dogmas?
I mean, I'm never patient. This is actually my biggest challenge being in a bank. Although we are much more dynamic than probably pretty much every other bank, but I think this is something we need to drive ourselves every single second to the next thing. Because what Chris said is true, especially in these phases where we are right now. Competition is hard, right? And I mean, you had a great quote. I maybe have another one from Ayrton Senna, I guess. It is, you cannot overtake 15 cars in sunny conditions, but you can when it's raining. So this is something that I foresee that we will see much more often in the next month and years, that they are totally new players and using the capabilities of all the other ones and the infrastructure and architecture. And this is something we need to adapt every single day and really understand where our customers shift to and be as quick as possible to keep that customer satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. You're talking a lot about a close alliance when working together, and we've talked about corporations a lot today. That seems to be the thing. From your point of view, why is that the kind of partnership of the future when it comes to digital finance?
I think in the end, when we think about what is digitalization in its core, on the one hand, it has a lot to do with data management, but it also has a lot to do with making it much, much easier to combine different core competencies. And in the first step, that sounds like something great, but there's also a disadvantage with that it means that you need to have a very clear core competence which is relevant for everyone else, or you go out of business. And that's something which, from my perspective, is underappreciated. So I remember, let's say, I think it's long time ago, so I can now speak about that freely. So I worked for Deutsche Bank, Dresdner Bank, the savings banks, a private bank, and also worked with some others from the industry. And roughly 20 years ago, 15 years ago, when you exchanged basically strategy paper, I would say you could change color and logo and you had the same strategy. Mm-hmm. And everyone had the impression that this is unique and clearly their USP. If you are so exchangeable, you basically don't have any USP. And in a time like digitalization, where it's much, much easier to go for the best solution, I mean, you can exchange a partner like you can exchange an app pretty much using the right API. Everyone wants to go for the best solution, the best partner, the best player, and around a certain USP. And that, from my perspective, will change dynamics quite dramatically. So either you really can offer a clear USP, or you have to rethink what you're doing in order to find a different field, because otherwise it's much, much better to go for the respective core competency.
And that USP obviously must be on both sides.
No, it should be complementary. So you should have something which is valuable for the others you are working with. And so for me, always the simplest example is basically the smartphone. You have the iOS, but then you have different applications and you basically combine whatever the best solution for yourself by combining the right applications, doing a few customizations on it, and then really say, okay, that and this then the perfect solution for you. If there's an app on it which is not anymore the best one for this particular field, you just exchange it. So the respective USP needs to be on the level of the app, and it's a different USP combining all these apps, making them work together. And so then the customer experience comes together by combining all these different USPs. And that is very visible on the app level, on the smartphone level, but that's the same what I would expect when we think about the provision of financial services. So for example, what we do as a company, we basically provide an iOS for investment services and investment solutions. And then there are some applications on it, if we use the same picture, which we provide ourselves, like for the portfolio management. But there are other parts of the value chain where we clearly see that others are much better in it. So identification, AML checks, research, where we connect to other parties and then basically say, okay, by connecting everything, we provide the best solution for our respective clients on the receive side, which then in turn use it, enrich it with their own USB and provide it to the end customers. And this thinking in ecosystems, from my perspective, also means being aware that USPs will be combined much more flexible. So you better have one.
So good partnerships are like apps on a phone?
I like that picture, actually. I mean, I didn't know that, but I really like it. I always compare it with like Lego pieces or puzzle pieces, right? That just needs to fit together. I mean, it's super important that you have a clear strategy and not just say, yeah, whatever. I mean, I partner up with somebody and then it will work. You need to have the same mentality. You need to have your supplier processes really in line, both on both parties, right? But in the end, this is everything Chris just said is something that I fully agree to, so yeah, not necessary to emphasize.
All right. Well, I thank you very much. We have another very important official item on the program, that is lunch break, and that's why we have to finish this on time. I appreciate you being here. That was really interesting. Thanks a lot. And for you all, I would like to see you again at 2:10 here at Transformation Stage. And until then, enjoy your lunch break, and then I see you again 10 after 2. Thanks a lot.
Enjoy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.